Good afternoon, YouTube land. Dan here from GeekCast Radio, doing another must-read comic book video. This is where I talk about some of the best comics and explain to you why you must read them. This time around, I'll be discussing Alan Moore's Saga of Swamp Thing, specifically focusing on, for this video, just Volume 1 overall, but the entire series, really, the entire run is a must-read. And I'll be honest, when I was hesitant to get into a series of this nature because the purpose of this series was to kind of talk about really great books that maybe don't get the same amount of attention as something like a Watchmen or Dark Knight Returns. Those books have been talked about on ad nauseum. Not much more I can discuss. And Swamp Thing does somewhat fit into that realm as well. It is really high regarded. If you look at some of the greatest graphic novel runs of all time, it's certainly listed there. And being written by Alan Moore, kind of looked at as maybe his coming out party in a way, but really redefined him as one of the best writers in comics. But with that said, I still think there's some things to talk about, and I do wonder if for some people it is not to the level as of a Watchmen. If there's still some hesitation there because Swamp Thing may not be a character that people have the same level of regard for, knowing he's kind of coming back in Justice League Dark, and we have the upcoming DC movie or TV series, whatever they're calling it, on their streaming service. I thought I'd go back to one of the the most earliest, well, not the earliest, but one of the most infamous runs of that and talk about it. And a big reason why is I feel like this is one classic run that is worth every ounce of praise that it gets. There's a lot of comics people will go to and see like, oh, it's not as good as people say. I feel like 90% of the conversation behind Watchmen often is how it's overrated or something of that nature. And I feel like that's a word you can really put to anything anymore. But I feel like with Swamp Thing, there's a lot to really appreciate on a level, and it's a type of writing that we don't really see, and it's really great just watching someone come into their own as a creator and take an idea, take a character and evolve it into something new, but do it effectively. And because that's always a challenge, taking a character and reinventing it in a new way. And those realize that Len Wein and Bernie Wrightson were the ones who created Swamp Thing, but we see Alan Moore come in and slowly take the character over. And I thought it was a really good progression of how to take this character of Swamp Thing and say, okay, well, what can we do differently that hasn't been done before? And this actually begins with kind of the ending of the last arc, as we see Arcane, his former arch nemesis, is now finally dead and perished. But we also see that death, with it comes a lack of connection now. That Arcane represented a connection to his past life, Swamp Thing's past life as Alec Harland, and how now he's lost that, and in a way his connection to humanity is severed even further. And that's really what Alan Moore is doing in this bit by bit. Is just kind of setting the stage, letting us know that this is a Swamp Thing that's really going to have an identity crisis. And obviously a lot of praise for Alan Moore, but man, there are some layouts in this that are just phenomenal. Just looking at this page, I feel like you could take a look at this page and spend tons of times just analyzing it. How the panels are laid out, utilizing that motif of the pendulum there, which is not a pendulum, but I can't think of the actual word for it. And this happens page in and page out. And knowing how historically detailed Alan Moore was with his scripting, I'm sure a lot of this was plotted out within him. But I do love I love reading a book, reading a classic comic, and not knowing what's going to happen next in the most basic sense of not even knowing how the page is going to be handled out. Yeah, I love a 9-panel grid, but I really love when people play with the idea of paneling and really adjust it, use it as part of the art form, use it part of the storytelling, and it's done to great effect here, and it's something that maybe doesn't get the praise it deserves. And the detail here is phenomenal, but I just find that we have the beer bottle there, how it's leaking into the other panels, the mirroring that's done here. There's a lot to really dissect, panel in and panel out. This is I think a book that I can't even do it justice on my own, just discussing it. I'm just really hitting the high points, but it's really phenomenal to look at. And there's a tends to be this thought that less is more, or the less you say the better it is, or show don't tell. And I think a lot of people, I think that mantra is right, but sometimes can be misused, meaning that less words mean better, or less dialogue means better. And I don't necessarily think that's always the case. I think dialogue can show you as well as tell you. And it's, to me, it's not the amount of words that are on the page, it's how well those words are done. And Alan Moore does paint a picture where you're like, I don't even know if he needed to be a comic book writer. He could have been a novelist, and his words are so descriptive that if you remove what's on the page, you can really even just tell what's happening. This might be hyperbolic, but to me, he is in a way like the Shakespeare of comics in the way he reshapes dialogue, the way he uses and develops his stories. And when you actually have in this book, Swamp Thing actually talking to an actual skull like Hamlet, I think he knows exactly what he's doing within this. When we see Swamp Thing actually even talking to a skull Hamlet like as he's having this identity crisis, I think Alan Moore knows what he's doing there. I'm not thinking he might think he's a Shakespeare of comics, but I don't know. That to me is an apt description of his work. And what this really does, though, this first arc, there's a lot going on within this first arc, but first and foremost, it's taking the idea of Swamp Thing, taking this idea of it's a man who's been mutated, and reshaping that into something else. And how it does it, I think, knowing you're going to completely change a character that's been around for some time, sometimes people can be really blunt when that happens. It's suddenly, oh, now this is the character's origin, here you go, this is what it means. With this, it's bit by bit. We see the Arcane, his lack of connection, how that starts to really kind of affect him. Then he begins being chased down by these soldiers trying to take out Swamp Thing for once and for all, and how that impacts him to the point where, spoiler alert, but he actually gets finally shot and presumably killed. But what that all leads to is probably one of the most infamous scenes in all of comics, especially for this time period, was the autopsy scene. And I would say it's phenomenal, not necessarily because it's not necessarily drawn in a phenomenal way, but the words on the screen, words on the page, how it's questioning where humanity comes from. Also, what it does, it shows us that bit by bit, he takes out these organs, and they're grass-like. There's like this should be a spleen, and it's a spleen, but it's a spleen made out of twigs and bushes, and what exactly is happening here? It's kind of confusing. It's like, oh, is that just what he's like? Is that, has everything been mutated? Why is he looking like this? But slowly the realization comes in that no, Swamp Thing isn't really a human being mutated. He's something more than that. And that can be a concept that's hard to grasp. I thought what they did really well is take an actual phenomenon that exists within science, and the tapeworm phenomenon, where it will eat another. It'll have one go through a maze, and then they'll have a worm eat that worm and be able to utilize the information that that other worm knew and get through the maze as well, just through the ability to eat something. That idea of osmosis in a way, and taking that scientific fact and just expanding upon it, exaggerating it to explain, well, if that can happen, well, that's add in a little bit of science fiction and the idea of now this is nature kind of taking the essence of this actual human being, assuming that's who it is, but realizing that no, this is not a human, this is a kind of a makeup of actual nature that's been manifested into a human-like creature. And what then happens after that, when this creature that is forever powerful now realizes its worst fear. It's always been trying to connect back to its past self, but realizing that it's not that, it's something completely different. And then the anger and the action that takes place after that is just phenomenal. And you see this crisis take place, him asking that question of where humanity begins, where does life begin, and providing a lot of examples within that. So I thought it's really deep, but at the same time rather entertaining and horrific, and there's a lot to kind of look into regarding just this character. And when I read this for the first time, getting into Swamp Thing, I'm like, okay, this is Swamp Thing. This is going to be a character that's all about taking nature versus pollution, the evolution of man, and how technology is advancing and how that's going against kind of nature in a way where that's not the case at all. I mean, that's touched upon, but it's really not an idea of nature versus human or Swamp Thing versus man. It's Swamp Thing trying to understand man and his place within it. So I think this by all means deserves much of the praise it gets, and then it expands upon that further in later volumes, and how it connects to then relationships with other human beings, and what does that mean when it actually, where does love play into the part. And there's that infamous scene with Swamp Thing and Batman that happens later on, and that was actually my first introduction into knowing how well regarded this series was actually from not from like a comic book website, but was listening to Kevin Smith talking about it on one of his Evening with Kevin Smith or something like that. He talked about the Batman story that tied in with Swamp Thing, and Swamp Thing taking over Gotham, and it finally kind of prolonged me to go into reading this. I will say for the very first volume, the first story arc is phenomenal. The second one isn't. I think it's fine. It's not as good when you have such a great storyline. You get into the next one gets into more of like a classic kind of horror. You have a demon, a monkey dealing with a Ouija board. So it's like this really deep and poetic, and dealing a lot with psychology and philosophy, and then suddenly just kind of more of a straightforward horror book. But I guess it's trying to play both sides in a way. Again, still trying to find yourself within the first volume. It's good. It's not bad, but just when you have such a great comic, it doesn't necessarily. The first volume in a way doesn't necessarily end on a high note compared to what came before, but still, it's worth reading. And you do see within that story just the Swamp Thing kind of again finding himself and trying to figure out what exactly his place is now that his entire identity has been redefined. But like I said, if you're looking to get into Swamp Thing, it sometimes there can be apprehension to read classic comics because this is very wordy. This is not going to be a quick read. You have a lot to go through, but the art is worth it. The story is worth it. It's deserving of it. And then if you enjoy the first volume, there's plenty to go after that. Even if you don't love Watchmen, because I know there's a lot of people who don't really love Watchmen as much as many others, check out Swamp Thing, because I think I actually enjoy Swamp Thing more than I enjoyed Watchmen. I just found the sensibilities I think hit me a little bit more, and also Watchmen can be so nihilistic. It is not always my cup of tea in a way. So so Saga Swamp Thing, fantastic read, highly recommend it. One of the best comics, I think, deserving of all the praise as I indicated. So if you read Swamp Thing, let me know your personal thoughts. What are some of your other favorite runs on Swamp Thing? It's a character that I know that's had some notable ones. Scott Snyder recently probably had the most notable series on him, but now we're coming with the TV series, or the DCU series. Are you excited for that? Let me know in the comment section below. But that's it for me. If you want to like, share, subscribe, do all that. If you look around me, there should be links to other videos that I do and an ability to subscribe. But if you want to check out more stuff, you can also go to GeekCast Radio with all of our stuff there, our podcasts or videos. We usually have a podcast or video drop every day. So we have tons of content from movies, TV, comics, technology, general geek discussion, news, anything and everything in between. That's it, though. So just remember, comics are for everyone. The key is finding the right one. Until next time, thanks for watching.